In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can use Spring Boot in Angular to upload and download files. I have the application that we're going to be building running, and it's running on my local computer, as you can see here. And it's a fairly simple application where a user can come in and they can upload and download files. And I'm going to go ahead and just click on Choose File here, which is the button where we can click to choose the files and then upload the files. So I'm going to go ahead and click Choose Files. And I have this list of files here, and those are like videos that I have created for a course, and I'm gonna upload one of those files. You can upload one file or you can upload multiple files. So here I'm just gonna select one file, and you can see there was a progress bar that just happened here, and it was really fast and we didn't get to see it, but you can see that the file has been processed and now I have the file here. And if I need to download the file from the server, I can also do that. So I can just go ahead and click on this download here, and you can see I can go ahead and download the file, and I can just save it, and you can see the file is downloaded down here. Another thing I'm going to be showing you is how to display the upload and download progress, which is something you usually want to show a user whenever they're like uploading or downloaded some very large file, to a remote server. So if I go ahead and click Choose Files again, and you can see all my files, they're sorted by size. So I'm going to scroll down and pick like a very large file, for instance, this one. You can see now we have the progress bar, and we can monitor the progress of this file being uploaded to the server. And you can see now it's done. And the same thing will happen if I try to download the file. And if I click on download here, you can see the file is being downloaded. Once it's done, then I'm presented to save the file, and I can just choose the location and then save the file. And we're going to be using Angular with Spring Boot in the backend to do all of that. And we're not going to be using any libraries or anything like that. We're just going to be using TypeScript/JavaScript and using Spring Boot for the backend. So if I open the developer tool here, just want to show you because I have some logs going on. And if I try to upload something again, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can find a bigger file. So let's say this one. You can see that all the events are being printed here on the console as the file is being uploaded. Once the file is done, then we get the response from the server. And the same thing again is going to happen. So if I try to download, you can see that we're downloading the file on this server, and then we're presented to save the file here, and I can go ahead and save the file if I want to. And like I said, we can select multiple files, so I can click here, and then I'm going to press Shift and select those files and click Upload. And you can see that it's taking a little bit longer because I have more files. And it's done. You can see all the files are here, and I can of course download any of those files. So that's what I'm going to be showing you. It's a very simple application. However, the functionalities that you're going to learn here, they're going to be very useful because this is the same logic that is used every time you're trying to upload and download file, and you want to show something to the user so that you can show them that the progress is being made. Then you can use that in any application that you have. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of how this whole work with HTTP in the backend and the front end, and then we're going to dive right into the code. So I want to give you a quick overview of what's going on here before we actually dive into the code, right? So we have a client, and that client is what needs to communicate with another computer somewhere, and we're going to call that other computer a server. The client can be a server and the server can be a client, and the only way you're going to be able to make a distinction is by looking at the computer that is initiating the request. The computer that is initiating the request is the client, and the computer that is always running, usually always running, and it's waiting to be connected, that computer is the server. It can be vice versa, depends on the way you look at it. But the client is the computer that is initiating the connection, and the server is another computer somewhere on the internet or in your network or on a separate network, and it's just waiting to be connected by some other computer. So we have our client, and then we have our server, and we want to take a file from the client and then send that file over to the server. And this is something that happens all the time. So if you on the internet, you download some file, you're on Google Drive and you upload some file, you're doing exactly the same thing. So your computer is the client, and the Google computer on some Google's data centers is just gonna be the server because you're trying to upload files there. Of course, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but at a high level, that's the idea. Your client is your computer, and then you want that computer to take a file and then upload it to Google's computer so that you can save your file there. And the way we're gonna do this is by using the HTTP protocol. So we're going to have HTTP running on the client, and then HTTP also running on the server. Now HTTP is using a different protocol under the hood, and that's TCP/IP. So TCP is what's going to actually initiate the connection from the client to the server. So whenever you want to transfer the file, TCP is going to open a connection on a socket on your computer, and then it's gonna use the IP address of the other computer and try to open a connection with that computer on some socket on that computer. So since we're using HTTP, so that's usually port 80 or 443 if we're using secure socket. But in this case, we're not. So that's probably going to be port 80, or it can be any port that you specify depending on, what type of application you're building. But for HTTP, it's usually port 80. So TCP is what is actually going to create the connection. Now, there's a lot more that we can say about TCP/IP. They can be pretty complicated, but we don't want to go into all the details. So TCP is going to create the connection on two sockets on those two computers. And I'm just going to represent this channel that is going to be created in yellow here. Now, what's going to happen is whenever we need to transfer the file, TCP is going to take that file and then chop it up into chunks and then create packets and put those chunks into packets and then send them from the client to the server. So instead of sending the entire file, unless the file is really small, TCP is never going to try to transmit the entire file from the client to the server. What it's going to do is it's going to chop up the file into small chunks and then send those chunks one by one over to the server so that the server can put all those chunks together and then reconstruct the file itself. And this is where our progress comes into play, because as TCP is chopping up the file into small chunks and then sending all those chunks, we can actually have some monitoring going on where TCP is telling us how much of this data is being uploaded and how much is left to be uploaded to the server. And we can use that to determine the progress of the file being uploaded from the client to the server. Now, once the entire file gets to the server is then gonna, put this file together and then save it somewhere on the server. So that's the processing of the server. But what we're really doing when we're showing the progress, we're showing the file or the chunks of the file being transferred over the network wire by TCP bit by bit. So this is really what's going on under the hood at a high level. Again, this is really way more complicated than that, but we don't want to get into all the details. But that's what's going on under the hood whenever we try to use HTTP, which is an application layer protocol, and it uses TCP/IP under the hood to create the connection and then transfer the file. I'm on the Spring Initializer website, and I'm gonna go ahead and create a Spring Boot application. I've already filled in the information about the application, so the group and artifact ID, the name of the application. I give a little bit of a description, as you can see here, and then I give the package that I want, and I'm gonna be using a jar for my packaging, but we probably won't need this because I'm not gonna be deploying the application. And then I'm gonna be using Java 8, but you can choose Java 11, 16, WAR for your packaging, whatever will work for you, whatever makes sense for you. Now, the only dependency that we're going to need for this is going to be the web dependency. So I'm going to click on add dependency. I'm going to type web, and I'm just going to pick the first one. And that's the only dependency that we're going to need for this application because we're not doing much. And I'm going to go ahead and click on generate here to generate this application. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save it in my downloads folder. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and open this with IntelliJ. So I have the application open in IntelliJ, and as you can see, it's a very simple Spring Boot application and nothing special here. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a new package. I'm gonna right click here, go to new and then package. And I'm just gonna call this package resource because that's where our controller is gonna be. And then I'm gonna create a new file here and I'm gonna call it file resource because this is our file resource, like we're manipulating files somehow. All right, so the first thing I wanna do is I wanna annotate this class as a controller because this is gonna be a REST controller. So I'm gonna do REST controller and it's right here. And the second thing I wanna do is I wanna give this a path. So I'm gonna do add request mapping. And let's just say we're gonna map everything in this class to /file. Okay, so that's gonna be the root path for this file resource. So I'm gonna go ahead and collapse this for now. So what we wanna do is very simple. So the first thing we wanna do is we want to set a location. So define a location. So we need a place to save the file on the server. So that's gonna be the first thing we're gonna do. And then what we need to do next is define a function, or well, since we're in the backend now, this is a method to upload files. All right, so that's the second thing we need to do. And the third thing we have to do is to define a method to download files, because that's what we're trying to do. So let's go ahead and tackle the first requirement. So what we want to do here is to find a location on the server. So I'm gonna do public static final string, and I'm gonna call this directory. So I'm gonna do directory. So that's gonna be the folder where I'm gonna be saving all the files. And then I'm gonna set this equal to, system that get property. And I want to get the home directory of the currently logged in user. And the way you do this is you do user.home. So what this is going to return is whatever user is logged in, it's going to give me the home directory of this user here when I call the system get property and I pass in the string user.home. And then I want to navigate to my downloads folder. So I'm going to do /downloads. And let's say I'm going to create a folder called uploads. Okay, so all of the files that I'm going to be creating, they're going to go inside that folder that I'm going to call uploads. And that folder is going to live in my downloads. Okay, so this is the location where we're going to save all the files as they're being uploaded. And this can be anywhere you want. So you can define this as a string. You can use the system properties to get the currently logged in user location or the home of that user, and then define whatever path you want. I'm just trying to tell you that this is whatever you want it to be. It doesn't have to be exactly what I'm doing here. I put this in my download so that I can delete them later because I don't need to keep those files as I show you how the application works. Now the second thing we have to do, we have to define a method that's gonna go ahead and upload all the files. So I'm gonna go down here and then I'm gonna do at post mapping, because this is gonna accept the post request since we're trying to create some resource on the server. In this case, that's gonna be file. And I want this to go to upload. Okay, so that's gonna be /upload. So we're gonna go from file and then upload. That's where we're gonna send all the requests to upload files. Now I'm gonna define this function. So I'm gonna do public, and this is gonna return a response entity. And what I want this to return is a list of string. Okay, so I'm gonna do list of string. And the reason for this is because whenever the user or whoever is using the application, whenever they upload a bunch of files or one file, I want to return in an array or in a list the names of the files that they have uploaded. So that's why I'm returning a string, a list of string here, because I need those names so that whenever they try to download the files, then I can look the file up in the backend, which is in the server this application is running, by referring to the name of the actual files. So I'm going to return the list of the names of the files. And then I'm just going to call this upload files, and I'm going to pass it some parameters. So what we want to do here, we want to have a way to retrieve all the files that are being passed in this request. And the way we can do this is by calling the request parameter. So we're going to do request param, and then we're going to be looking for a key called files. Okay, so that's going to be the key that they're going to pass whenever they're uploading the files from the form. So if they have an input element, they're gonna put the name of this input as files. And you're gonna see how this is gonna connect to the front end once we build the front end. And then here we can just get all the multiple files that they're gonna pass. So here we're gonna pass in a list, and we're gonna say this is gonna be a list of multi-part files. And we're just gonna call those multi-part files here. So we're gonna get all the files that's being passed to this function or to this method whenever they try to upload something. So now once we have all those files, then we can get the names of the files and then put them in a list, return that list to the user, and then save those files like the physical files on the server itself. So what I want to do is I want to define a list, and that's going to be a list of string, and I'm going to call this file names, and I'm going to declare this as a new array list. So I'm going to be using this list so that I can save all of the file names and then return them to the user. And next I need a for loop. So I'm going to do for every multipath file that I'm going to call here just file that I get from the list of all the files that I'm getting here. So I can do something like this. Okay, so we're gonna loop through and then multipath files. Okay, so we're gonna loop through all of the files and then we're gonna save them in this computer. So I'm gonna scroll up a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is get the current file name. So I'm gonna define a string here and I'm gonna call it file name, and then I'm gonna set it equal to the file in the current iteration. So I'm gonna do multipath file. Well, this is supposed to be file and get original file name. And we can clean this up a little bit if we want. So here I can do string util, and it's coming from string that clean path. Okay, so we can just clean this just to make sure. All right, so now we have the file name of the file in the current iteration. Now we need to define the directory, so where we're gonna save the file. So I'm gonna use a path for that. So I'm gonna do path, and I'm just gonna call this file storage. Oops. And then use the get method to go ahead and pass in the location. So here, this is gonna be the directory, and I'm also gonna pass in the file name. And let's just call the to absolute and normalize that. All right, so this is gonna give me the storage where I need to put the file, which is this directory, and then the file name is going to be this file name that we're passing in here. So now that we have the file name, we have the storage where we're going to put the file. All we have to do now is to just copy the file in that location. And to do this, we can just call the copy, and here we can pass in the input stream of the file. So we can do file that get input stream, and then we can pass in the location. So we're going to do file storage. And another thing I want to do is, in case there is an existing file in that specific location with the same name, I want to replace it if it already exists. So I can do replace existing. And all of these are coming from Java NIO. So if I hover over this, you can see it's coming from Java NIO. So the copy, the get here, coming from the same package. So make sure you import those from the right place. So now at this point here on line 40, the file has been saved in that location. What we can do then is just put that file name in our file list. So I can call the file names, and I can just add this file into it. So I can do file name. Okay, so the file name of the file in the current iteration that we get here, we create the storage. So the location where we're going to save the file, we save the file in that location, and then we add this file name into the list of files so that we can return those file names in the body of the response. So once we're done iterating, as you can see here, we can go down below here and then return a response entity. And I'm gonna send an OK to the user. And in the body of the response, I'm gonna pass in the list of all the files. So I'm gonna do file names. And that's all we have to do. So just to recap, we're going to get all of the files coming from the request. We're going to assign them to this list of multiplied files. And then we're going to define a list of strings so that we can put all of the file names. And then we're going to iterate, or we're going to loop over every file that we receive from the user. We're going to get the file name, get the location, and then copy this file in that location, replacing any existing file if there is any existing file there. And then we're going to add this file name into that list, so that we can return it once we're done looping here as a list of all the files or the name of the files that we saved, so that we can use those name or those file names later to download the files. And that's all we have to do for this. So now let's go ahead and tackle our last requirement, which is to download files whenever the user gives us the file name. So let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit so that we can start this method. So the first thing we want to have a path for this. So I'm gonna do at, and this is gonna do a get mapping because the user is trying to get information from the server. And I'm gonna map this to download. And let's just say I need the file name. So to get this, I'm gonna get this as a path variable. So I'm gonna put file name here. And I'm gonna do the body of the method, so public, and this is gonna return a response entity again, and this time it's gonna be of type resource. So I'm gonna type resource because we're trying to send the resource back to the user. And make sure you import this from Spring Framework. And I'm gonna go ahead and call this function download files because that's what it's doing. And to get this file name, I'm gonna get it as a path variable. So I'm gonna do add path variable and then pass in the name. So here the name is going to be file name, which is the same name that we have here. I'm going to copy this and pass it here, and then I'm going to get this as a string and then just call it the same name, so file name here. And then we can start with the body of the method. So the first thing I want to do with the file name is to find this file, right? So you can see here the same way that we get this storage and then we put the file in, we need to be able to do something similar so that we can find this file on the system using the same directory. So I'm going to go down here and then define another path, and I'm going to call it file path. and I'm gonna call the get again, and then I'm gonna pass in the directory where everything is. So directory, and do to absolute path, then normalize, and then I want it to resolve the actual file name. So here I'm gonna pass in the file name. So this path is gonna give us the entire path to the location of the file with the file name itself. And then what I want to do just for sanity is to check if this file exists. So here I'm gonna do if files exist. So this is gonna check to see if the file exists in that path. Okay, so if it exists, it's gonna return true. So in that case, I'm gonna negate this with an exclamation mark. And then here I'm gonna say if the file doesn't exist, then let's throw an exception. So I'm gonna throw a new file not found exception, and that's coming from Java file.io. And I'm gonna pass the file name, and then I'm gonna say this file was not found on the server, something like that. I mean, this can be anything you want. So in case we do find the file, then we can continue, we can skip this if statement and then continue. Now you have to understand that if this is true, which means if we didn't find the file, then the method execution is gonna stop on line 53 because it's gonna throw an exception here. So then if the file exists, then we can go ahead and continue. So what I want to do is to create a resource. So I'm going to do resource, and I'm going to call it resource, and I'm going to call new URL resource, and then pass in the file path, and here, and do to URI. So that way we get a resource that we create out of the path or the file resource that we have on the computer. And we need to add this exception to this method. So let's just make it throw IO exception, because that's gonna cover everything. And we need an equal sign here. And then once we get this resource, we need to send a content deposition as the headers, and then pass in the resource in the body of the request. That's how you tell the front end that this is something that needs to be downloaded. So I'm gonna define some HTTP headers, and I'm gonna call them HTTP headers, and then do new HTTP headers. And then I wanna do HTTP headers and add some headers. So I'm gonna do add. And the first thing I wanna add is the file name. So I'm gonna do file name, because we need to pass in the file name and the headers so that we can get that file name when the user is trying to save it. We're gonna get it from the headers. And then here, I can just pass in the file name that they gave me. So the file name that we receive up here, we pass it in here as a header in this response that we're sending back to the user. And then we need to pass in the content deposition header, which is super important. So I'm gonna do the same thing again. So HTTP headers.add. And this time it's gonna be content deposition. As you can see here, it's coming from HTTP headers. And I'm gonna go ahead and just import this statically so that I can have more space. And what you wanna do here is do attachment, lowercase, and then passing in the file name, which is gonna be something like this. So I'm gonna copy this and then paste it here. And I don't want this. So we're gonna do file name, and then set it equal to the file name that we got. And I don't need this. And what I need here is a plus sign. Okay, so we're passing in the file name after the attachment as the content deposition header. We're passing in the word attachment, and then the file name is equal to the file name here. Or we can get the file name from the resource, because the resource will also contain the file name. So you can do something like this, resource.get file name as well. That's just the same thing. And then after that, we need to send a response to the user. So I'm gonna do return. Of course, that's gonna be a response entity. Oops, not resource. Response entity. And I'm gonna send an OK to the user. And another thing that's really important is the content type. So here I'm gonna pass in the content type, because we need to have the content type of the file so that we can decode the file and with the right content type, and then download that file. We're gonna need this information in the front end, and you're gonna see how this is all gonna come into play. But we need to pass in the content type here of the file that we're sending to be downloaded. So what I wanna do is do parse media type, and then call the files that probe media type, and then passing in the path, the file path. Okay, so this is gonna try, it's not always gonna happen, but it's gonna do its best to determine the media type of the file that we're trying to send back to the front end. And then after that, I want to pass in the headers. So I'm going to do dash headers, and pass in the headers that we have, HTTP headers. And then in the body of the response, I want to pass in the resource. So here I'm going to do resource. Okay. So this is how you send something to the front end to be downloaded or make it downloadable. You have to pass in this very important header and the response, which is the content deposition. And we can go into this if you want to take a look. And you can see it here. It's just a simple string that says content deposition. That's just the key of the header. So that's all we need to do here. And we're going to go ahead and use Postman so that we can test this application and make sure it's working fine before we actually go in the front end and then try to see if we can, use Angular to make requests and then save files here. All right, so let's go ahead and test the application. I'm going to go ahead and start the application and let it come up. All right, so you can see it's running on port 8080, and I just realized that I have a typo here. I'm gonna delete that. So that's supposed to be download. So I'm gonna restart, stop and rerun. All right, so the application is running on port 8080, and let's go ahead and give it a try. Gonna open Postman. So I'm pretty sure you guys already know what Postman is, but you can just use it as an API client to make HTTP requests. I'm gonna open a new tab here, and I'm gonna go to localhost. Okay, something's coming up, and I want to go to file and then upload. So let's see if we can upload something. So I'm gonna go http://localhost 8080 because that's where our application is running on, and then go to file/upload. So remember, when we build the application, the base path here is file, so we have to go to file and then upload here, and that's what I'm putting in here into this request. Okay, so file upload. So now we have to pass in the file in the body of the request. So I'm gonna go to body, and this is gonna be a form data, and the key here is gonna be file. So remember, this files key is important, and if we go back, we're passing in this key here. Okay, so it's gonna look for this key to pass in those files as multi-part files. Okay, so this name we pass in here, and this, they have to be the same. Okay, and then we need to change this from text to file because we're trying to pass in files. Okay, so we're gonna give the key for files and then select files. So I'm gonna go ahead and select files, and let's say I'm gonna select this PowerPoint and open. All right, so the file is selected, and now we need to send the request. So I'm gonna make sure this is a post request. Remember, the backend accepts a post request. You can see here post mapping, because we're trying to create some resource on the server, and then send this request and see what happens. Okay, we get an error, 500 internal server error. So let's go ahead and check out the backend and see what's going on. Gonna bring this up a little bit, and I can see I have this file size limit exceeded because the file was kind of too big, as you can see here. And that happens, so let's see if we can find a smaller file. So I'm gonna remove this and pick my profile picture here, select it, and then send. Okay, so here's the file name. So we know that it's working. So to fix this problem with the size, we can put a configuration in the application.properties. So I'm gonna show you how you can do this. So I'm gonna bring this down. So we can ignore this for now. I'm gonna restart the application after I put in the configuration for in the properties file so that we can allow big file size in this application. So let's go ahead into the resources folder, expand that, and then go into the application.properties. And what we want is spring.servlet, and we want this file size. And I'm gonna put a very large number here so that we don't have to worry about this again. Megabyte. And the other one that we need is spring.servlet, and we want the max request size, and I'm gonna put the same number here, just like that. Okay, so that way it's gonna allow very large files, because I want to show you how I upload videos, because it's gonna show the progress better. So if we're just uploading like very simple pictures that are not very large, then you're not gonna see the progress bar. So that's why I put a very large number here so that I can use videos and upload them. So I'm gonna go ahead and close that out, collapse this, and then restart the application. All right, the application restarted. So let's go back and remove this and go ahead and select the video again. open, so the video is there, and then send. And you can see now everything is good. So let's see if we can select multiple files as well. So I'm gonna select this and this and this. So this request is probably gonna take some time because those video files, they're very large. So I'm gonna go ahead and send this. All right, let's wait and see what happens. This is on my local, so it shouldn't take too long. Okay, so we can see now all the files have been uploaded. So I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate this. So I'm gonna click duplicate. And now I want to go to download and then pass in the file name. And I need to change this to a get request. And let's see if we can download this file. So I'm gonna copy the file name, go back here, pass in the file name. Now we don't have to send any body or anything. This is gonna be a path variable that we're looking for as the file name. And then we're just gonna do the logic from there. Let's go ahead and send this. Taking some time because those files are large. This file is a little bit too large for this thing. So let's see if I can get this other one here and pass it here and send. Okay, there we go. So you can see the file is in the response. So that other file was kind of too big maybe because those files are really, really large. But you can see here 13 megabyte. So that's, it's not super large, this one, because it's only a minute, but the other one, I think it's like 10 minutes. So it might be a little bit too big for this thing, but you can see we have the file here as the body of the request. So let's see if we send a picture, if we can actually get that picture. So I'm gonna select this. Well, I've already uploaded this, but it's fine. We can upload it again. All right, so then I'm gonna copy this name, go back here, change this, and then send it. All right, you can see the picture is here, and this is me. So we're able to, you can click here to save this as a file. You can see now we have response.jpg. It didn't get this file name correctly because we're not really manipulating the headers, but we can get the headers and then get the file name in the header and then pass it here instead. This is just this Postman application that's just doing this by default. So if we go into the response headers, you can see we have the file name here and you can see the proper file name is here. So whenever we're working on the front end and we want to download the file, we will pass in the file name from the headers, which is going to call file name here that we're passing in as a custom header, as you can see here. So it seems like everything is working. We can upload files, we can download files. So next, what we have to do is to work on the front end. So let's go ahead and start working on the Angular application. So I'm going to be using the Angular CLI to create the application. And hopefully you guys already know all these things like, npm and installing the Angular CLI and using the Angular CLI to create and manage Angular application. But that's what I'm going to be doing here. So that's why I have this page up here. If you need a reminder, you need to have the Node Package Manager. And then with the Node Package Manager, you can install the Angular CLI, and then you can use the Angular CLI to manage your project, your Angular projects. So I'm going to do ng new, and I'm going to call this upload and download. So that's going to be the name of the front end Angular application. And I'm going to say yes on that. And it's asking me if I want routing, and I don't want routing in this application. So I'm going to say no. Yes, I'm fine with CSS. And it's going to go ahead and create the application for us with all the boilerplate code and all the files. So I'm going to wait, let this finish, and then come back. So the application has been created. I'm going to go ahead and put this somewhere in the middle and make it a little bit bigger. Clear the screen and zoom in a little bit. So let's go ahead and go inside of that, upload and download. The first thing I want to do is create a service because I need to use that service to make HTTP requests. So hopefully you understand the concept of services in Angular. So I'm going to do ng generate service so that I can generate a service. I'm just going to call it file and click enter. I'm going to say yes. All right, so now our service is created, and I'm going to do code dot so that I can open this folder with Visual Studio Code. All right, so this is our Angular application. And let's go inside of the source app and our service is here. So I'm gonna delete this spec file because we're not gonna be dealing with tests. And this is the service where we're gonna be creating function to make HTTP requests to the backend and then pass those files to be saved and downloaded. So what I want to do into the app module is to import the HTTP client module because we're gonna be using it. So I'm gonna do HTTP client module. And this is supposed to be a comma. And now I need to import this. So I'm gonna go up here under the ng module. I'm gonna do import and pass in the name of the module that I want to import. And that's gonna be the HTTP client module. And this is coming from here /HTTP. All right, so we need to tell Angular that we're gonna be using HTTP, and the way we do this is by going into the main module of the application, in this case the app module, and then pass it in here as one of the modules that we'll be using in this application. So I'm passing the HTTP client module because we'll be using the HTTP client. So now I can go back to the service and I can import the HTTP client. So I can do private. I'm going to call it HTTP, and that's going to be of type HTTP client. Okay, it's coming from the same package as you can see here. So now I'm ready to write functions and then use this HTTP client so that I can make HTTP requests. So I'm going to go ahead and define the server location. So I'm going to do private, and I'm going to call this server. So that's going to be the backend that we just built, and then set this equal to the backend server. So let's just copy everything from here and then go back and paste it here. So that's going to be the backend, just the base URL. So localhost 8080, because that's where the application is running. That's the port. And then here we want to define a function to upload files. So define function to upload files. And then we need another function we're gonna call, we're gonna say define function to download files. So pretty much everything that we did in the backend. So we need a function to upload the files and another function to download the files. So here I'm gonna call this function upload, and it's gonna take a form data. So I'm gonna do form data and give it a type of form data. And this function is going to return an observable. So I'm going to do observable. And this observable is going to be of type HTTP event. And inside of this event, it's going to be a string array. Okay, so you remember whenever we create all the files, whenever we save them, we return an array or a list of string. Okay, so that translates to the front end. That list, the Java list, translate into an array, like a JavaScript array in the front end. And then here we're going to do return, and we want to call the HTTP, and we want to call the post because we're trying to post some information. And again, we have to pass in the type, so string array, and we want to pass in the server. So here I'm going to do the server name, so that server. And you remember we have to go to file and then /upload. Okay, so that's the location where we're gonna send the request, and then we're gonna pass in the form data. So I'm gonna do form data, and then I need to pass in some options, which is gonna be in the form of an object. So what I want to do is say that we want the report progress, which is a Boolean, to be true. So we want the HTTP client to report us all of the progress of the files being uploaded, and we also want to observe all of the events. Okay, so all the HTTP events that occurs, we want to observe all of those events so that we know, when the file is being uploaded, when the connection is established, and all the events that's going to happen as TCP is chunking the file up and then sending the file over to the wire. So that's what we're telling HTTP client to give us. We say, hey, give us all the report for the progress of the request, and then we're gonna observe all of the response, which you have to pass whenever you define your observable to be of type HTTP event. And if we go inside of this HTTP event, you can see that it's just all of the events that can occur whenever you make an HTTP response. So the sent event, which is when the request is sent, and then you get some headers, you get the HTTP response, which is the actual response that's going to be of a certain type. So you can see that the type that they're passing in here is only going to be passed to the response here, and also for the HTTP user event, which is like a user defined event here, but we're not dealing with this. But this HTTP event is just a type that's just all of the different types that can happen whenever you send the HTTP request. And you can see the response again here is being typed here, which is what we're doing here. We say, hey, give us all the events, and whenever the response come back, inside of the body of the response, we're going to have a string array or a list of string, which is going to be all the file names that we uploaded. And then we're going to do something similar to the for the download. So I'm going to copy everything here, go down here and paste this. This time we're going to take the file name. So I'm going to call this file name. And of course, this is going to be of type string. Okay, we just need the file name. And the return type again, because we need to observe all of the chunks being transmitted over to us. So again, we're gonna say, hey, we need an HTTP event type here, and this time it's not gonna be a string array in the body of the response, but it's gonna be a blob, okay, which is some sort of a binary representation of a file here. And this needs to go to download. And since this is a GET request, so I'm gonna remove this, and we don't need to type this. It already knows what it's doing, and we're going to remove the body of the request because we don't need it. And we also need to pass in the file name as a path variable. So here I'm going to go ahead and do / $ open and close curly braces, and then pass the file name here. And then the last thing we have to do is to tell the HTTP client that the response type this time is going to be of type blob. So the HTTP client will know that the response is going to contain blob information of some sort of a binary or some buffer of some array of some sort. And then we just need to change this to download. Okay, so we're gonna upload files using this function up here, and then we're gonna download files using this function down here. Okay, so that's what we're gonna do. So notice that I'm not passing in a type here again like I'm doing it for this function. That's because you don't need to pass in the type here whenever you're returning blob. And if we go into the definition of this get here, you can see that it already knows that it's going to return this blob. And up here you see that this is not a generic, so it doesn't take any type here. You just say get and then pass in your URL and all of your options. But if we look at the other one, which is up here for the post request, you can see that we're going to return an HTTP event of type T. So that's going to be the type which we're specifying here, string array. But also we have to do that as well up here. We have to pass in the same type here, which is what we're doing in here. So you can see that they're not the same. So you might want to say, hey, we need to tell this get to return, blob information, but you don't need to pass this here as per the definition file, as you can see here from Angular or from Google. So that's what we have to do in our service, and we're going to inject this service in our main component and then call those functions to upload and download files. So let's go into the main application, so the app component.ts, and I'm going to remove this title here. So what I want to do first is inject the file service. So here I'm going to define a constructor. So I'm going to do constructor, and inside of it I'm going to do private, and I'm going to call the file service, and I'm going to give it a type of file service. Okay, so we're going to inject the file service inside of this component so that we can use the file service here. So what we want to do now is to define a function to upload files, right? Which is going to be, so we're going to call it on upload files. And this function is going to take an array of files. So I'm going to call them files, and it's going to be of type files array. and it's gonna return void. And then here, what we want to do is to create the form data and then put all of the files inside of that form data and then call the service and then send those files over to the service. So if we go back to the service real quick, you can see here the service is expecting a form data. And this is how you get information from a form data. In the back end, you pass in the key for the input, and then it will map whatever the value is for that input into the data that you want to get here. In this case, we're getting a list of multi-part files because we know that's what it's going to be. So if that was going to be like some string, you would put a string here and then give it a variable name here as the parameter. So let's go ahead and create this form data. So I'm gonna go ahead and do a constant form data and then call the constructor, so new form data. And then once I have the form data, I want to iterate over all of the files that I get in this function and then put them inside of the form data. So the way to do this is to for, and then here I'm gonna do for every file of the files that I get. So for every file in this file, we're gonna loop through all of them. What we want to do is we want to go ahead and then add them to the form data. So I'm gonna do form data, and then I'm gonna do append. And then here, I'm gonna pass in the information that I need. The first is the key. So we have to do files. Now this name here, which is the key in the form, has to match what we defined here. Remember, we defined this as files. So it's similar to us making sure that when we use Postman, this key here in the form data, you can see it's the same name, same idea. We make sure this name was, or the key was files. Otherwise, it will not be able to map those values and then get the information. You will be looking for files, and if it's not named files, then it won't be, you won't find it. It will say, hey, I couldn't find this, and then we'll get an error here. And we don't want that to happen. So we have to make sure the names are the same for the key here. So let's go back real quick. So this has to be file. And then we're gonna pass in the actual file. So we're gonna do file, and then we can pass in the file name. And then I'm gonna close this, and I need a comma right here. Okay, so we put all of the files that we get in this array whenever this method is called from the template, and then we're gonna loop through all of them and then put them in this form data here. I just put this on one line, so you can see here it's a regular normal loop. So for whatever, and then put everything in, but I want to keep it on one line. I think it looks nicer. So then at this point, we can go ahead and call the service and then upload the files. So we're gonna call upload files, and then of course this is gonna take the form data. So we're gonna pass in the form data, and since this is an observable, so the request is gonna take some time, as you saw whenever we made the request using Postman. So we need to watch for the response. So here I'm gonna subscribe to this. Hopefully you guys already know what's going on here. When we use observable, we have to subscribe to the observable, and this is also a cold observable. So it's not even gonna emit, it's not even gonna run, or this function is not even gonna run if we don't subscribe to it. So here we know we're gonna get some event, right? Because that's what we're expecting. So once we get those event, we can actually run some logic. So what I wanna do here, the first thing I wanna do is console log so that we can see what's going on. So I'm gonna say, hey, log those event. And the second thing I wanna do is to call another function that's gonna report or do the logic to report the progress. So here I'm gonna do this, report progress, and I'm gonna pass in the event. So here I'm gonna do event. So this function doesn't exist yet. So I'm gonna go ahead and use the quick fix to go ahead and create. So declare and close this. Okay, so this function is declared here, and I'm gonna make sure it's private. Okay, because it's only gonna be used in here. It's not gonna be used in the template. So I'm gonna put this down for now, and then we're gonna continue with this. So all we have to do whenever we get the response from the server, all the responses are gonna come. Okay, so not just the actual response when everything is saved, but we're gonna get all the events that are gonna be occurring as the response is being made, as the file is being saved, and then eventually we'll get the response. And then I wanna handle some errors. So here, if I get some error and I want to do some logic here, so here I'm gonna do just console log that. So I'm going to do console.log and then log the error so that we can see something. And we need to put this inside open and closing curly braces because we use them up here. I have to use them down here as well. And the reason I'm using the curly braces is because I need multiple lines so that I can console log this. But otherwise, I could have just gotten rid of those and then remove this line and remove everything just like that. That works fine as well. Okay, so that would work. And then here I would do the same. Remove the curly braces, remove this, move this up, and then remove this. All right, so you can see it's nicer, but with this syntax, you can only have one line, and I need to have multiple lines so that I can console log the information. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this back. Just like that. All right, so this is it for the upload, and you're gonna see how we're gonna use this function in the template in a minute. So let's go ahead and do the same for the download. Again, I'm gonna copy this and then go down and here define a function to download file. So that's what we're doing here, and I'm gonna call it on download files. And here we need the file name, so I'm gonna pass in a file name, and that's gonna be a string. And in this case, we don't need any form data, so I'm gonna go ahead and remove that, and we just need to call download file on the service and then pass in the file name. Okay, and we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna get a bunch of events, we're gonna console log those, and then pass those events to the report progress, and then that's gonna report the progress that you saw when we did the demo, and then we're gonna console log any errors if we get any errors. So the next thing we wanna do is to work on this report progress. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So the report progress is going to be fairly simple. The first thing we have to do, you can see on line 34 here, we're getting an error. That's because this function accepts the string array, which we get when we call the upload. As you can see, if I hover over this event, it's of type HTTP event, and then the body is going to be a string array. So it's not complaining here, but it's complaining, well, actually here under report progress. But it's complaining for the download because this download is going to return blob, as you can see here, but then this only accepts string array. So we can say, hey, this is going to accept string array, or it can also be a blob. So here we're going to say blob. Okay, oops, just like that. So now you can see it's not complaining anymore because we make this a little bit more generic. So what we have to do here is to just take this event that I'm going to call HTTP event. Okay, we're gonna just determine which event we're on, and then we can use the information we get from that event to determine, you know, the amount of data that is loaded and the amount of data that is the total, and we can use that to determine the percentage. And let's go ahead and work on that. So the first thing is this is gonna return void, so make sure we put in the return type here. And then what I wanna do is to create a switch and then switch on the different event type. So I'm gonna do switch, and what I wanna switch on is the HTTP event type. Okay, and if we go into this type, you can see that this type can be 0, which is when the request was sent out over to the wire, like the network wire. It can also be upload progress. In this case, that's the first. And then the response headers, that's 2, download progress, and then the actual response, so the full response including the body, and then a user defined one. So we're gonna be using all of those 4 or 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because we don't have any custom event, but we're gonna be using those 4. Well, mostly those 4. Because we don't need to know, well, not that we don't need to know, but we're not going to use this sent event for anything. But we need the upload progress. We can take a look at the headers and the download progress, and whenever we get the response. Okay, so that's what this HTTP event type is, and that's what we're switching on. So we're switching on the type whenever it's, you know, sent, or we get the upload progress or download progress. So here I'm going to use the switch. And then what I want to do is to switch over the different cases. So here I have a case, and that case is HTTP event type dot, let's say, the upload progress. Okay, so whenever the event type is upload progress, we're gonna go ahead and do a certain logic. If it's download, then we're going to do a different logic. If it's the response, then, you know, we might just take the response body and send something to the user or something like that. So if it's progress, what I want to do is call, let's say, update status. So I'm going to create another function down below, and I'm going to pass in the HTTP event tab loaded and the total. So I'm going to copy this, paste it here, and here I want the loaded. So loaded. So the amount of data that's been loaded and the total, so that we can use this information to determine some sort of a percentage. And then here I know this is uploading. Okay, so I'm telling the function that I'm going to define that this is the uploading that's happening now. And then after that, of course, we have to break. Okay, so we're going to break. And let's go ahead and define this. We're going to work on it in a minute. So that's for the case for the upload progress. So if it's download progress, we're going to do something else. So I'm going to copy this, go on a new line, and do another case for download progress. Okay, so if it's download again, we're going to do the same thing, send the information over to this function, and this function is going to report the progress to the user interface. And I need another case for the headers. So I'm going to go down and do another case. So I'm going to change this to the headers. So if we get all the headers, in this case, I'm just going to console log them. So I'm going to do console.log, and we can do something like header returned, and then we can look at the event. Okay, so this is going to just console log the response headers. And then the most important, in case we get the response, I'm going to paste this again. So in case we get the response, that's when we need to either download the file or send the response over in case they're uploading the file, and then show all of the file names. So if it's the response, what I want to do is I want to check to see if I have an array of file in the response body. So what I can do is do the HTTP event and then access the body, and then see if it's an instance of the array. Okay, so if it's an array, then I know this is the response with the upload, and then I can run a certain logic here. And then otherwise, I know this is the download, so I'm gonna run the download logic here. And we're getting an error here because this is supposed to be the response. Okay, so that's the only time this event is gonna have a body, whenever it's response. So that's why it was giving me this error. So if it's an array, the body, so we know that this is the response whenever they upload files. So what I want to do is to loop over all of these files and then add them to an array. So all the file names we're going to get in the body, we need to show them on the screen so that the user can see them. So I can do for, define a constant file name of the HTTP event that body, because we know it's going to be an array. We want to, let's say, this file names, that's going to be a property on the class, and let's do on shift and then pass in the file name. Okay, so we're going to define this property right now, and quick fix, declare, and scroll up. So the file name is going to be of type string array, and we're going to initialize it as an empty array. Okay, so this is a file names that's going to hold all of the file names of the file that we're going to get from the backend. And then once we get the response, we just, you know, add all of those files inside of this file name here. And we use unshift instead of push so that we can add to the beginning so that the most recent can be on top. And the other case that we have, so whenever the response comes back and it's not like the body is not an array, then we know it's the blob that we get. Okay, so we can go ahead and run logic here so that we can save the file. And I'm gonna go ahead and use a library so that this can be easier for us. So let's go back to the browser, and the library that I'm going to be using, it's called File Saver, and you can just search it on NPM. It's quite popular. So it's got almost 1 million download per week. So I'm going to go ahead and just click this so that I can copy this command, and then go back to the application and open the terminal. And I'm just going to paste this, okay? NPM install, and then File Saver, and then run this. We're gonna make sure this is downloaded. All right, so let's scroll up a little bit. So 0 vulnerabilities. You can see it's been added in our package. So just to double check, I'm gonna close this, go to the package.json, and you can see if we go over to the dependencies, it's right here, okay, File Saver. Now we can use this File Saver to save file on the client browser. So let's go back to the application and let's go ahead and import that. So I'm gonna go up here and I'm gonna do import. So the import is gonna be a little bit different. So you have to give it a name yourself. So I'm gonna do save as, and this is supposed to come from file saver. Okay, so you see it came up here because we installed the dependency, and we're getting an error here because we haven't used it. As you can see, save as declare, but its value is never used or read. So we're going to use this save as to save this file on the client. So let's go down here, and we know this is going to happen in this logic whenever the body of the request is not an array. Then we know it's the blob or the binary that we're getting in the body. So what we want to do is call the save as. So I'm going to do save as, and then here we can create a new file. So I'm going to do new file, and what we have to pass in here is an array with the binary data. So here I'm going to call in the HTTP event that body, because I know that's going to be some binary data that I'm going to get. And then we have to pass in the file name. Now remember, we're passing in the file name as a header because we can just say, you know, like file name here or something like that, like file, right? Because this is always going to be the file name for all the files. So we need to have a way to retrieve the file name dynamically from the backend, which is what we did when we passed in the file name as a header. So I can grab that header from the request. So I can do HTTP event dot headers so that I can access all the headers, and I can call the get and then pass in the name of the headers that I'm looking for, or the key. In that case, that was file name. So that file dash name. Okay, make sure this is spelled correctly. So we pass in the file name here. So the file name for the save as, whenever it's gonna save the file on the client computer, it's gonna be the actual file name that we're getting from the back when we're accessing that using the headers. And that's what we set in the download here. So if we scroll down, you can see in the download we set those headers, and the key is file name, and then we're passing in the actual file name. So we should be able to retrieve this file name whenever we are in the front end as a header here, which is what we're doing by calling the HTTP event headers get and then the file name. And then the last piece of information we need to pass into this save as is the type of data. So if it's application.json or if it's some PNG or some video, so we have to pass in the type. So I'm gonna go on a new line and do type, and then I'm gonna pass in the content type. So here what I want to do is do $ open and close curly braces, and I'm going to access the HTTP event that headers again, and I want to get the content type. So I'm going to do get and then pass in the name of the headers that I'm looking for. In that case, that's the content type. So content dash type. So that's going to give me the content type and the headers, and then I need to tell it how to decode this. So I'm going to put a semicolon, and then I'm going to do character set, and then set this equal to UTF-8. So that way this save as will know how to save this information with the right format and the right character set. I need a closing curly braces here and semicolon and one in the beginning. And I need a comma right there. Oops. Okay, so that's all we have to do here. So you can see that we're getting an error here. And if I put my mouse over here, it says that the body can be null. Okay, so and we can't assign null to this new file here, which takes blah part. And this is just TypeScript configuration yelling at us. This code is literally fine. So one way we can fix this is to go into the, let's see, the TS configuration. So this file right here, and then comment out this strict true here, or turn it to false. Okay, so if I, for instance, comment that out and go back, you'll see that this is fine, right? Because it's checking and you say, hey, there's a possibility that this body might be null, and that might cause your code to break. So it's doing this strict checking for us. So you can disable this if you don't want to, but that's gonna come down to how you want your developers to work, because sometimes this is something that is set by like your team lead or something, because they want to enforce the good practice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it back. So I'm going to leave it here, and I'm going to go ahead again. You can see it's going to load and then give me this error. And one way to fix this is to just put an exclamation point here. And that means that you're certain that this is never going to be null, and it's just going to leave you alone. And you can do this for here too, because it's going to give you the same the same message that this can also be null. And it's true, there's a possibility that this headers doesn't exist and it's going to give you null. But in our case, we know it's going to be there, so we can just put this exclamation point here and that will do the trick. And another way we can save the file is by creating a new blob instead of a file. So I'm going to go ahead and show you an example. So I'm going to copy this and then go down and paste it. Okay, so instead of a file, you can say blob, and this take the, and this is gonna take the binary, so whatever we're getting in the body, and then an object. So here I'm gonna put open curly braces, and that's gonna give me the name of the file, and I'm gonna remove that one, and I'm gonna pass in the type. So I'm gonna remove this, move the type up here, and this is an object, so I'm gonna put open curly braces and scroll over, and then after that I'm gonna pass in this, and I need to close this with some comma. I'm gonna put this on a new line so you guys can see better, and then remove this guy right here and remove this. Okay, so that's another way you can do this. So you can create a blob. This time you pass in the an object, as you can see here, for the type, and then you pass in the name of the file. So either with a blob or with a file, either one will work. So we don't need both of them, so I'm gonna maybe comment this one out. So you can use it, whatever your preference is, it's gonna do the same thing. So now what we have to do is to work on this function to report the progress. So we have the loaded, that's gonna be a number, the total, that's gonna be a number, we don't need this undefined. And then the request type, so I'm gonna call this request type, which is a string, so that can be either upload or download, because we need this information to display the, in the progress bar, if it's a download or if it's an upload. And before I move on to this, to work on this method, let's just put a default here, just in case, just for sanity check. And we're just gonna go ahead and do console.log, whatever the case might be. So let's do HTTP event. Okay, so that should do the trick, so that we have a default, at least for a sanity check, even though we know, well, one of those will hit except the sent event, but we'll still be able to see it in the console log here when it's not any of those. So now let's go ahead and work on this. So what I want to do here is I want to create some property that I can use in the template. So I'm gonna do this file, let's call it file status, and let's give it a status, and I'm gonna set this equal to progress. So let's do progress. So that means that there's a progress going on, so we can use that. And let's see if we can define this with the quick fix, define the property. And the next thing I want to do is to call the file status, and let's also give it a request type. So I'm gonna just copy this, paste it here, and then passing in the request type. So that's gonna be either upload or download. And let's also give it a %. So file status %, and we're gonna set this equal to the amount that is loaded divided by the amount that is the total of the file. So whatever load that we're trying to send over to the server, we're gonna take the total divided by the what is loaded, and that's gonna give us our percentage. So I can just take the loaded and then just divide that by the total. And since this is gonna be a very small number, we can just multiply it by 100. All right, so we're gonna multiply that by 100, and just so we don't get like weird decimal number, we're gonna call the math that round and just round it up. So that's all this function is gonna be doing, and we can use this file status in the template so that we can determine if we're supposed to show progress, and we can use the % so that we can determine the percentage of the progress, and then we can use the response type to determine if it's an upload or download, because that's what we're passing in. Here you can see upload, download, and then again this is gonna give us the same. It can be undefined, and then we just have to do this for this. Okay, we're sure that it's always gonna be there, because if it's upload progress, then we're definitely gonna have something. But just in case, which is why it's complaining, because it's still possible that you might have this as undefined, you don't know what can happen. And this is supposed to be downloading. So downloading. All right, downloading. So we know when it's downloading and when it's uploading. So at this point, we're ready to start working on the actual template. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. Make sure I put a break here. But let's check to make sure this was created properly. So it gives it a type of any. That's not what I want. So let's go ahead and fix this real quick. So let's say this is gonna be an object literal, and we're gonna give it a status, and we're gonna start with empty string. Okay, so that's the status that we have, and then request type. So request type, and this is also gonna be a string, and that we're gonna start with empty string. And then the last thing we have was a %, and we're gonna start with 0. Okay, so that way this is typed properly. So if we go down here and we try to see what we can access on this object, you can see we have the % status and everything. So since we're using TypeScript, make sure everything is strongly typed, but we could have left like the, any up here and not define an object literal. But this is TypeScript, so we want to make sure we type everything as much as possible. So this is our file status. So at this point, we're ready to create a form and then call the upload function and then see what we get on the screen. So we're gonna go ahead and do this next. So we're gonna go ahead and work on the template so that we can give the user the option to upload files. And before I do that, I'm gonna do a little bit of cleanup here. I'm gonna make sure I declare this function as private because it's only gonna be used in this class here. We're not gonna be using it in the template. So I declare it as private so that it can only be accessed in this class. So I think everything else looks good. And another thing I did is, since I'm gonna be using Bootstrap, so I went into the style.css. I just import some Bootstrap styles here. Hopefully you guys are familiar with that. And what I want to do now is to run the application because I created this application. I added all this code like this service and everything in the component, and I haven't really run this application, so I don't even know if it's working. So let's open the terminal and do ng serve. Oh, not server. Yes, we want to do ng serve. So let's go ahead and give this a try and see if it works. So I ran the application and it looks like everything is fine, but it's giving me an error for file saver because I don't have the type definition, and we need to run npm install add types /file saver. And I looked this up and it says that this package contains type definitions for a file saver. So since this is just the definition for the type, then I guess I can just go ahead and install it. That's not gonna hurt anything. So I'm gonna go up here and clear this terminal and then install this. And you can see I get the error here as well. So let's make sure we install this so that we can get rid of this error. Okay, it's over. So I'm gonna close this and you can see now this error goes away. And I'm gonna go back here and restart the application. Make sure everything looks clean. All right, the application is coming up and we got an error here because we deleted the title. So let's go ahead and clean this HTML. Let's go here. I'm gonna go ahead and clean everything and just say, let's put a h4 and then just say hello or something. So that should fix it. And I'm gonna restart this and make sure it looks fine. I like when I have a clean first run. So we're gonna go ahead and let this come up. All right, this is because we're using an external library. So that's why it's giving us this little message here, but that's not a problem. And I'm gonna show you how we can fix this in a minute. So let's see if we can access the app and you can see hello here. Check the console, everything looks clean, okay? So this is the same warning again. And I'm gonna show you how we're gonna fix this warning because we're using this file saver. And it considered like a common JS library or dependency or something like that that can affect our performance. But if we trust this file saver, then we can just put a little bit of a configuration and that's gonna get rid of this warning. So it looks like the application is running fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and put in the HTML for this. So let's go back to the application and let's just remove this hello. And I'm just gonna go ahead and paste the HTML content, and I'm gonna show you what that looks like in the UI. Okay, so we have zero functionality here. Everything is showing at the same time, but we have everything that we need. So we have the the process file list that's gonna be down there, the form to select a file, and then some text here so that we can tell the user what's going on here. And you can see the progress here. Everything is there. So what we have to do now is to use the information that we have so that we can manipulate this the content of this page, because we don't want to show everything all at once like this. So let's go ahead and open the application, and in the HTML I'm going to go ahead and scroll up. And the first thing I want to do, as you can see here in this progress here, I don't want to show this progress unless the status of the file being uploaded or downloaded is progress. Okay, so you remember we defined this down here, this file status here, that's going to be progress. So unless this file status is progress, we're not going to show this this progress bar, as you can see here. So here I'm going to do ng if, okay, and then here I'm going to say unless this is progress, and we need 3 equal sign, and just like that. Okay, so we're checking to see if the status, and we don't need this dot, if the status is progress, that's the only time we're gonna show this progress bar. So now if we go back, you can see it's gone. It's not there anymore. So that's one thing. Now the second thing we want to do is you can see here, if we give this let's say style, so let's do style and then width, let's say 50. Okay, and if we go back, well, I have to make sure we can see this, so I'm going to remove this for now and go back. Make sure this is %. You can see that this is 50% filled now at this point. Okay, so we can use the width CSS style to manipulate the progress of this. So let's go back to the application, and I'm gonna put this back because we don't want to show this. So we know we can manipulate the width on this div so that we can determine the progress. So we can use the property binding that we have in Angular and then use the % on this to set this number as a percentage. So what we can do here is we can do bracket, because we're going to do property binding, and then we can access the style, and what we want is the width. Okay, so the width, and then we want to set the %, and we're going to do %. And then we can just set this equal to the file status dot %. So here I'm going to say file status and then that %. That's what we call it, not percentage. Okay, so this is going to set the width as a %, and it's going to use this number here. So whatever the % is, it's going to style this appropriately. So if I remove this again, just so we can see this progress bar and go back, you can see it's there, but there's nothing there. But let's test this out so you can see that it's really working. So if we go here and we set this to, let's say 50, okay, and this is going to be temporary. So if we set this % to 50, well, this is not going to be called yet. So let's put this back and let's give it a default of 50 here. So it's going to start at 50. So if we go back, you can see it's 50. Okay, so that's how we're going to manipulate this. So let's put this back to 0 and put the if statement back, okay, because we don't want to show this unless the this is progress, this is in progress. And then inside of here we can put upload or download, right? So if we go back then, and well, we have to see this again, so let's make this, I'm gonna leave this as 50 for now, and let's just duplicate this line and comment it out, and let's just remove this if so that we can see what's going on. All right, so let's go back. You can see upload and download, and this is the This is the style, this that we put in here. Okay, so we can use property binding to show what's being done, and then the percent that's being added. So we can do double curly braces, and then access the file status, and then get the request type. So here we're gonna do that. Oops, request. Oops, request type. Okay, so that's gonna tell us if it's upload or download. Remember, we have this logic down here. It's gonna either be upload or download, and we just access this request type that we're setting either here when it's upload progress, and in download progress we pass in downloading. So we can do this here, and then for the percent we can put a space. Well, make sure this is correct, and then we can do the same for the percent. And in here we're gonna do percent. Okay, so that's gonna say downloading. We can even put like ... if we want. That doesn't change anything, or we can just put it here like ... and then ... Okay, so that the user knows that this is uploading. I put a space here and then put the percentage. All right, so that's gonna be that. You can see now it says 50, but since we have empty string here to begin with, so for instance, if I say uploading ... and go back, you see uploading 50. Okay, but we're gonna manipulate this dynamically. Let's go ahead and remove all this. So remove empty string. This is 0 because we don't have any percent. We started at 0, and let's delete this line and then put this line back. Okay, so now we know that this is gonna work the way that we want it to work. So now let's go ahead and scroll down and work on the form. So here's the form. You can see the form is here. Now we're not using the forms module because we're not gonna do template driven or reactive form in Angular. We're just gonna react to the input change event, which is gonna happen on this input here. So that's why I didn't import the forms module or anything like that. So another thing I want to point out to you is, well, first of all, this type is file, which is why we see it that way, so that we can select the file, and then we give it a name of file. Well, we're already setting the name files here, so even if this wasn't file, I think it would still be fine. We give it an ID that we don't need, so I'm gonna go ahead and remove that. But another thing is this other property called multiple. Okay, we need this on the input so that we can select multiple file when we open our file explorer on the computer from the browser. Okay, so if you don't have this multi, then it's only going to allow you to select one file. So we need to have this multi here, and then this is just some CSS class coming from Bootstrap. So what I want to do here is to react on the change event. So here I'm going to tell Angular to react on that change event, and then call our function. So here I'm going to pass in the name of our function, in this case upload files. Okay, so I'm gonna go back here, pass upload files, and then to get the files from the change event, we can call the $ event. So that's gonna be the event, and then we want to go to target and then files. Okay, so that's gonna give us an array of files. And if you guys want to see like what this looks like, I can remove this part real quick, and I can go ahead here, just console log everything from here, and then comment all of this out, and let's just console log whatever we're gonna get here, which is gonna be the event. Okay, so I'm gonna remove this. I don't need to give it a type, and it's called file, but that's gonna be the event. Okay, the change event that's gonna be passed in here. So this is again the TS configuration yelling at us, but that should be fine. So if we go back, open the developer tool, go to the console, clear it, go in here, select the file. You can see we have the change event. Okay, so you can see type change because it's a change event. And if you drill down, you go in here, you go to target, and you should see files in here, and you can see we have the file that we just selected. Okay, so the name of the file and the type and the size, etc. So this is how we get the file from the input. So now I can go back and undo all of this, since you guys now see how we're gonna get the file from the event, and then I can put this back. So we're gonna go into the event, target, files, okay? And that's gonna give us all of the files. So whenever this change event occurs, it will call that function, pass in the files, which is what this function is expecting, which is an array of file. And then we're gonna do our logic here. So at this point, the upload should work. We can go ahead and test it just to make sure everything is working. So let's go back to the application and let's see if something is gonna work. So I'm gonna refresh it and then select the file. Okay, you can see that it actually works, which we get the type 0, which is when the sent event occurs, and we get this course error because we are on a different domain. Okay, so the backend is running on 8080 and the front end is running on 4200, so that's gonna give you the course error because they're not on the same domain. Okay, so we just need to put a configuration in the backend to allow the localhost 4200 to be able to access this backend application. I'm pretty sure you guys are familiar with this, but I'm going to show you how I resolve it. I have the code somewhere, and then every time I'm building some application, I just literally just copy and paste it and then make some changes here and there. So let's go ahead and open the backend application, and let's see if we go to the main application file. So in here, I just have to define a bean. So I'm going to go down and paste the code and make sure everything is imported. So this is a course filter bean, and we're just defining what we're allowing, the method that we're exposing, and everything else. So you can see here, we create this URL based configuration. Then we say, hey, we're gonna allow credential. We're gonna allow origin, which is gonna be the 4200. And then we're gonna allow those headers. So the JWT, which I'm not using here, but there's one important one that I have to point out to you, is this expose headers. Remember, we have a custom header and it's called file name, as you can see here. So we have to make sure this is exposed, otherwise we won't see it on the front end. Okay, so make sure you have this the way that I have it, and then make sure you tweak it in the way that you want. So for instance, we're not using any put or any patch or any delete, so we would have to delete those three methods. But I'm just gonna leave them here. They're not gonna do anything. This is just a demo. But this is the configuration that I have. I just have that piece of code somewhere, and then whenever I need it, I just copy and paste it because, you know, I don't want to keep repeating typing all of this. But make sure in the expose headers, we expose our, you know, file name, which is a custom header, because otherwise, when we try to access it, like when we try to do this here, it will be null. Okay, it won't find this file name because it's a custom header and we didn't tell the backend to expose this header. So I'm gonna go ahead and restart the application, and let's go ahead and try it one more time. So let's make sure this is coming up. All right, so it's a very small application, you know, took a couple seconds to come up. And let's go back and refresh this and upload the file again. All right, so everything works, but we get this NA here and we get our 200 response here. So we can see the loaded, everything is here. So it looks like it works, but we have an issue with the downloading ... So let's go ahead and check this out to see what's going on here. So here, files, okay, report progress, %. So everything looks fine. I think after this is done, then this becomes some undefined value because we don't have any loaded or total, and it's still looking at this. So what I need to do is to stop this from showing. So I can go up here and then I can say, once we get the response and then we do all of that, we can just set this to done. Okay, so that this doesn't show anymore. So that means that once the response comes back, and then it's going to set this to done so that we don't have to see the progress anymore, because it's going to give us some weird number, because this is going to be like undefined or something, and it's going to try to, you know, calculate and compute this, and it's not going to work. So let's save this, and I think that should be all. Let's go back and pick a file, select it. Okay, that was too fast. Pick a larger file. You can see uploading, and we still saw the NA again, because after the event type 1, where we have the uploading, then it's a different event that doesn't have the loaded or total. So it's best if we move this here as well. Okay, so once we get the response, we set this to done. Otherwise, it's gonna do this, and then it's gonna still do done. So let's go back and try it again. Upload a large file. You can see the upload. 100% and it's gone. All right, so now we can go ahead and work on the download. So we don't even want to show this unless there is like files that have been processed. So we're going to put an if statement on that. So let's go back to the application and go back to the template, and let's scroll down a little bit. So here is what we're going to display the list of all the files that have been uploaded. So the first thing I want to do is to put a condition on this. So ng if. And we're gonna say if the file name, so file names, and we're gonna check to see if there is anything on the array. So we're gonna do length and check to see if this is bigger than 0. Okay, so if this is the case, then we're gonna show this this list here. And then here we can loop over everything. So we can do ng for, and we're gonna say let file name of all the file names that we're gonna get. So all of the ones from this array that we define in the component. So now we can show the file names. And then in here, we can just display those names. So we're gonna do, file name. Okay, so we're gonna pass in the file name here. And in the same way, we can put the click event on this link here. So I'm gonna do call the click event on this link here, and then once they click on this, I just want to call the download. So here I'm gonna call the on download files and then pass in the file name. So here I'm gonna pass in the file name that I received for each iteration here. So pass in the file name. So this is gonna call the on download files, and this is supposed to be file because we're downloading a file at a time. All right, so on download file. This is supposed to be files because we can upload more than one files. All right, so that should work. So let's go back, and you can see now this is clean. So I'm gonna close this a little bit. So now I can choose the file. You can see, boom. And if I click on download, there we go, boom. So let's see if I can upload a larger file. So I'm gonna scroll down, select this big file. You can see it's uploading. All right, it's done, and you can see the file is right here. So if I click on this file, downloading, and there it is. So you can see this is working fine. And another thing is to verify the files that we're adding are there. So let's close this and run it again just so we can get rid of those errors. Then I open another session. And what I want to do while the application is coming up is go into the download folder and then go to the upload folder. It's supposed to be uploads. And we have a bunch of files here that we don't need to keep. So I'm going to remove everything. And we get an error here. So these errors that we're getting, they're probably coming from the configuration in the TS file. So let's go back to the application. And let's go to the TS config. And if we scroll down, so this is what giving us this error. So the strict checking. So I would definitely just remove this. And let's go back. I'll probably need to restart the app and run it again. And you can see now it works fine. Okay, so those TypeScript configuration, let me put them back. So you can see those configuration, they're important. I'm not gonna say just remove them, but sometimes they're a little bit annoying because they're giving you a bunch of errors. So I'm gonna go ahead and comment them out so you guys can still have them. But this is where what was causing the problem. It's saying, hey, this doesn't exist, this can be null, etc. And we know our stuff is not gonna be null. So you can see now everything works perfectly. So let's go ahead and try this again. Upload 100%. You can see all the events here. And then if we click download, and then you can see we can download the file. And I want to show you the folder. So I'm gonna open it and bring it over. So you can see at this point we have this file in there which we just uploaded. So let's go ahead and clean that up again. Run that command again, delete that file. You can see now it's empty. And let's go ahead and upload files. I'm gonna take some files here and upload and bring this up. You can see all the files are appearing here. So this is working fine, and again we can download everything. You can see it's here and I can save it. You can see that the name is the same, so we don't have anything that like download that we have with Postman because we're using the headers to get the name, and you can see the file is working here. It's a very simple functionality, but then at the same time you really have to know what you're doing so that you can design it the way that you want. And again, you know, we didn't follow all the best practice for this. So for instance, in the back end, I didn't create like a service. I did all the processing and put all the logic in the controller. So you usually wouldn't do that if you're you know, building a large application, because you want things to be decoupled and you want to separate functionalities as much as possible. So you would probably create a service and then put the logic in the service. You wouldn't do it that way. I mean, there's other things I'm sure you guys are picking up, but we're not following like the best practice. This is just a quick tutorial so that I can show you how this can be done. And again, in the front end, we probably would have a service for this as well, because you can see this is a lot of code here. So you can probably just create a service for this and then make it update this status here. So you would probably have like just this status object and then call a function that's just gonna you know, do the work here. You probably wouldn't do it here. You would have a separate service. And another thing is we're not doing proper error handling. So you can see here I'm just console log it, and you can't really do that in production. You can't console log things when you're deploying your application. So we'd probably have like a way to you know, send those errors to the front end, either with an alert or some sort of a message or something that the user can see so that they know something went wrong. And lastly, I want to show you how you can fix this error here that we're getting here, because we're using the file saver. So if you click on this link, it will tell you what to do. All you have to do is to go into the angular.json and then add this allow common JS dependencies and then put the file saver here. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this and go to the Angular JSON file and here, and I'm gonna search for this option right here, and I'm just gonna put it at the bottom. So I'm gonna go down here, paste it here. I'm not using load dash, but I'm using file saver. I'm gonna do file dash saver and then save that and close it. Probably need to restart the application again. Run it again, make sure it comes up. All right, so the application is up, and now if we go back, refresh, you can see this error is gone. So that's all I had for you guys. You can go ahead and, you know, grab the code and then use this however you want in your application, and I'll see you guys in the next one.